Hello everyone, my name is Jacob Foley. I chose the Tencent Empire as the company that I want to do for my final project because I admire them. I also like playing the video games and they blow my mind to how they came from this small company to what they are today, which is why I named it the Tencent Empire. So let's get started. It was founded in 1998. It was founded by 5 people: Ma Hutong, Zheng Zhidong, Shu Chenye, Chen Yidan, and Zheng Liqing. I actually find that their story is very similar to how Facebook started. It was these guys who were in a garage or a similar environment, and they had this idea and they followed through with it. So, interestingly enough, even though they were in China, they originally were trademarked and incorporated in Cayman Islands. So originally, when Tencent came out with their messaging app service, it was first called OICQ. However, AOL had something similar called ICQ. And at the time, AOL was a bigger company, so they sued Tencent, and Tencent lost, so Tencent had to change their name from OICQ to QQ. When the company first started, it remained unprofitable for 3 years. The funding that they were getting was two-sourced. The first source was from premium QQ users, where they would pay in to get a little bit more out of the service, and that was one source of revenue. The other source was from a company, a South African company called Naspers, and they bought 46.5% of the shares of Tencent. I find that one particularly ironic because now China is buying a lot in Africa, and they're the ones who are actually funding. So it's kind of interesting for me to see the reversal. In 2005, it licensed its penguin character. I know people in China are familiar with it. People in the United States might not be as familiar. It's a cute little penguin. It kind of looks like the Club Penguin, in my opinion. So in 2004 is when the company started seeing a little bit of a balance. They weren't actually losing money anymore, so they introduced, part of this was because they introduced gaming. Another part was staff change, which I'll go into later on in the slide. And then 2008, because of the direction they were going, they actually showed real profit, and they were making a lot of money, and they still are to this day, although there's still some challenges, which I'll go over. Let's go into Ma's origin. So his origin, I'm only going to really focus on Ma out of the 5 people because he's the most important. He is the face of the company. He's the one who really had the idea of the company, and he is the most important, and he's still an important character. So he was born in Badagang, Hainan, China. I hope I'm saying that correctly. He actually went to Shenzhen University. So as we learned in class, that there were basically 4 stages of Chinese entrepreneurs. The first was really not educated. The second is when they started becoming educated. The third is they went overseas to become educated and then brought the education back and started the companies. And the fourth, which I would categorize Ma in, is that they were actually educated in China. And because the Chinese education was very good at that point, they were able to become successful entrepreneurs without having to have gone overseas to study. So he was in Shenzhen University. When he graduated, he got a job with China Motion Telecom Development. So he was part of the development team there, and this is where he actually got his idea for WeChat, which I will go into later. He was nicknamed Pony because Ma in the English equivalent of Ma is horse, and horse can't be a pony, and that is the reason why he chose, or that is why he's nicknamed Pony. That's an interesting tidbit. So his philosophy is very straightforward. He does believe that the government comes first. He's very pro-government. He does not really believe. He believes that freedom of speech has its limits. If it goes against the government or if it's dangerous, that it shouldn't be allowed. It should be controlled. He does believe in the execution of ideas, not necessarily thinking about the ideas. He believes that it's very nice to have ideas, but unless you actually put it into paper and put it into motion, then those ideas kind of die out. So he's very, very much of a do it type of person than a thinker. The only thing that I could find that was kind of Confucianism or Confucian was his. He believes giving to charity. He gives a lot to charity. I think it's around like 10% of his income goes to charity. Although I couldn't get a number, an exact number. I equate this with Confucius because with Confucius, he believed that the king should kind of take care of the subjects, and everyone has their place. And the subjects should listen to the king, while the king does take care of the subjects. And I'm not calling Ma a king, but he does have this empire, and he does believe taking care of the people. At least that's the impression that I got. So industry. So the actual company has kind of three main assets. It has the messaging, which is WeChat. It has banking, which is WeChat Pay, which you can pay for stuff with the app. I know when I was in China, I wasn't able to get a bank account in China, but for my Chinese friends and the people who were, all they had to do was open the app, and scan the QR code, and they were able to pay with their banking, with their funds like that, it blew my mind. It really did, like sharing bikes and everything. So that was very impressive. And their third, and the most paramount in my opinion, is video games. I believe that they've put so much into video games that, and that's where they get most of their profit actually. I'll go more into detail later, but if you ask anyone, at least in America, like, oh, do you know what WeChat is? They might not know what WeChat is, but if you ask someone who plays video games, oh, do you know who Tencent is? They'd be like, yeah, I know who Tencent is, because they've kind of made their mark, at least with video gamers, inside America. So let's go on. So there's really three kind of main stories that I want to go over. That kind of shaped, in my opinion, Tencent. The first is how Tencent really came to be. So Ma was basically working, and he went to a seminar where the seminar was about this new messaging service. I believe it was the first one of its kind, called ICQ. It's built by an Israeli company, and that blew his mind. So he thought, look, I could take that and I could actually make it better and bigger. And he did. So he created OICQ. The problem, which is the next story, is that AOL bought ICQ and then challenged Tencent to be like, look, your name is very similar, and this is basically a copyright violation. If you don't change your name, we're going to sue you for a lot of money. Tencent lost, and they had to change their name to QQ, which I believe is actually better in the long run, but I'm sure it wasn't like that at the time. And then the third story, which I find interesting, is that Tencent kind of mimics Microsoft in the way it handles its development team. They'll have Microsoft, the way they handle the development team is they'll have two different groups kind of competing with each other to help innovation. And Tencent does the exact same thing, basically. They'll have two groups. They'll kind of be against each other and challenge each other, and it's been working out so far. So let's talk about their brand reputation. So they've been voted China's most valuable brand 4 times in a row, which says a lot, especially, in the beginning it wasn't like that. However, I know they were recently overtaken by Alibaba, I think in 2017, but they're still, 1 or 2. So they're very well known. They do offer a high quality gaming service. So they do have... So when people say Tencent for video games, they know that the video game will at least be solid and not a lot of bugs. They do offer reliable service for WeChat. I know for what I've used personally on WeChat, it worked. There were no bugs. Now occasionally here with Facebook messaging there'll be bugs, but I didn't get really a lot of bugs with WeChat. So and a lot of people say that they do have reliable services. So they do also have domestic trust. In China, WeChat and Tencent is highly valued, and people trust the company. Interesting. I guess I could have put this in stories, but an interesting reputation that it used to have was for booty calls. So from what I've read is that people would get off the airplane in China, and then right away there would be prostitutes who would message them and say like come here and that type of stuff. So it got kind of the reputation of being a booty call app service, and I know people still use it for that, but it's kind of shaken off that kind of reputation. And one reputation that was negative that they had to overcome was they were basically called the king of knockoffs because originally they would kind of just copy a lot of other people's products. And then eventually, and I'll go into this later, but especially when they went global, they realized that they couldn't do this, and they had to be more vigilant about not about getting rid of that reputation, which they have successfully done so. So some of the challenges that this company has faced, one of them is overcoming Chinese misconceptions. This really goes more for a global picture. A lot of people, when they see any Chinese company, really, they'll think, oh, it's connected to the Chinese government. It's communist. It's bad. Like they're always watching you. So they have to overcome that. Like, look, we're a company. We're a global company, and that's really not the case. Although on the other side, a lot of apps still, watch you. So I don't know why that really matters that much, but so that's one of the challenges that they have to overcome. Another one is actually going global themselves. They really only started going global in 2015. That's when they really started on the track to become more global. And I'll go over this later in the slide, but I would have to put them going global really in two categories. I have to split up their gaming industry from their messaging system. I would argue that their messaging system is not as prevalent as their gaming section, which again I stated earlier that people would know, at least video gamers would know that who Tencent is and what they do, while people might not know what WeChat is. One thing that they do face within China and the Chinese government is control. I know recently that they've had some issues concerning, control of their content. Again, originally that all Chinese companies, but Tencent in particular, worked with the government. And I know there was a fear, I believe, within the government that like they weren't working as well. So recently, at least in the gaming department, the Chinese government put a hold on all of the new video games that Tencent has come up with and are currently creating, and that they are going through a lengthy, very scrutinized inspection before they're allowed to be open to the market. So there's some backlash with that. And then another challenge that they're overcoming is video game addiction. So when it comes to their video games, a lot of parents, within China specifically, complain that their child plays 8 hours video games a day and is neglecting schoolwork, and sometimes people don't even go to their jobs. There's a story even that a kid was playing Wangzhou Rongyao, which is basically one of the most popular mobile video games in China, and the kid basically like jumped off a building and killed themselves. So what Tencent did in response to that, they did add like kind of age restrictions to the video games, and that if you're below, I believe it was 16, you could only play like an hour a day. So they're kind of working on that as well. So those are some of the challenges that the company is facing. So their globalization strategy. So it's kind of two-pronged. Basically, they're trying to put their own content out into the global market, while at the same time they're also investing even in competitors' products, because their mindset is, even if, for example, even if I invest, I'll go with a video game analogy. So basically, if they're currently investing in Blizzard, which is actually a competitor, because they also create video games. However, their rationale, Tencent's rationale, is that even if my video game loses to the competitor, which in this case be Blizzard, they'd still be making money because they're invested in Blizzard. So it's kind of like a win-win situation, and they've also been doing that with their messaging service as well. They've been investing in Snapchat, which is a competitor to WeChat. So again, it's more like even if we lose, we still win, which I find is a brilliant strategy. Yeah, they invest in other companies, especially competitors. And they also go around buying, global companies that are already established. An example of this would be a company called Glue Mobile, which made mobile games in the United States, and they bought them. It looks like they are doing pretty well. So we talked about code switching in the first module, and they've been kind of successful when it comes to that. And so like I said, for the most part, they're doing okay. So when it comes to so basically they translate correctly. They do translate into English, Spanish, Japanese. And those are the ones I know that they for sure do. The translations are correct. So when it comes to actually doing the language part, they're correct. Now, the only part that they do have kind of a problem with is the cultural differences that each country has. And the reason why I say that they're having an issue a little bit with it is again, we have to go back to the how I separated them with the video games and the messaging. With the video games, they were able to successfully code switch in every single area besides the actual platform that the video game is on. So they got the culture right, they got the language right. The only thing that they really missed the mark is how people play video games in other countries, especially the United States. The biggest area that this is seen in is mobile video games versus console video games like Xbox and PlayStation. People in the United States, people who play video games really only play video games on either a computer or a console, like a PlayStation, Xbox, or Switch, which is Nintendo's brand. In China, however, people really either play just on the computer or they play mostly on, like a cell phone. So originally when they started putting out video games in the United States on mobile phones, and although they were kind of successful, a lot of people didn't take them seriously in the United States because they weren't on like an Xbox or PlayStation. Recently, they've actually kind of changed the direction, so they still come out with mobile games, but they've also been focusing on making video games for the computer as well as for some of the consoles. An example of this was they recently came up with a deal with Nintendo where they took Wangzhou Rongyao, which is their most popular mobile game. They made an English version called Arena of Valor, which they released on phones, but they also released it on the console as well. So they've been learning, at least in the video game area. So I would say they've actually, as of right now, they've successfully code switched to a foreign audience. My only suggestion would be to keep making video games for consoles. Otherwise, people, at least video gamers in North America, would not really take them seriously. Now, when it comes to messaging, I would say they kind of, I don't know if they failed, but they're having an issue because WeChat is not really known, in at least North America, it's not really known. If you say, hey, do you have WeChat? They'd be like, what is that? Part of this is, I don't think it's really a code switching problem, it's just that there's a lot more competition here with Facebook and Snapchat and Twitter and WhatsApp. And I'm sure there's a bunch of new ones that I'm even too old to really know, but so there's a lot of competition there. And I do think, as I went on earlier in the slide, one of the problems that they do face is kind of shaking off that negative connotation with communism in China, being a Chinese brand. But I do believe that they should be able to code switch at least a little bit better. They do have the language down again. They do have the language down perfect, so that isn't the issue. It's more the culture. I really don't know how they would be able to code switch with their messaging system. I think that's a little bit more difficult problem to tackle. The only thing I could think of is to put more advertising out there, and maybe put in the advertisements, maybe put different ideas that pertain more to like American values. Maybe put a commercial of WeChat and Thanksgiving, and maybe everyone has to like get home for Thanksgiving, and the community, they're very thankful that they have WeChat because it's very easy to communicate on. I really don't know, but that's one area that they're having a problem with. Yeah, so again, it's a big difference between the West and the East Asia. So there's two case studies that I want to kind of delve into that show what they did right when it code switching and kind of what they did wrong. So the first one is Arena of Valor, also called Wang Zhurong Yao, which is the Chinese, and I have a picture right there. That's the Chinese version of the original, and this is where they actually succeeded. So they actually bought a company called Riot, which makes a game called League of Legends, which was at least arguably the most important, most popular video game in America. It's recently been overtaken by Fortnite, but it's still very popular. So they did buy that, and then they made their game called Wang Zhurong Yao, which is basically League of Legends, but on the cell phone, which is very popular in China. And then again, they moved it over to an English version called Arena of Valor, and initially it wasn't doing that well, but once they hit the deal with Nintendo and they have it on the Switch, it's been doing better. So that I would say is a positive. They code switched correctly. Again, they did the language correctly. They translated correctly, and they also got the culture right with consoles versus the mobile scene. Now this is a big case. This is a big no-no. However, this is not actually something that Tencent did. This is actually another company called Blizzard. This is something they did, but I just wanted to kind of show what they did, at least in the video game scene, which is a really big, it's a big no-no, at least in North America, and hopefully Tencent does not follow this path, which it does not look like they are. So basically, Blizzard has come out with a video game series called Diablo, and recently, every year Blizzard would have their own showcase where they would show video games that they're creating for that year and that are coming out soon, to try to build the momentum for when the game actually comes out. And this year, I think it happened a month ago, they were showcasing all the games, and usually they leave the best game to last, and people knew it was going to be a Diablo game, and so they're very, very excited. And so that I honestly forgot this guy's name, but he is the lead developer on the game, and he comes out and he's like, okay guys, so we have this game called Diablo, and it's a mobile game. Well, Diablo Immortal, and it's a mobile game. So everyone is kind of shocked and hurt, which is kind of ridiculous, but they were. And they started booing him on stage, and his response, instead of saying, instead of code switching correctly and maybe saying like, look, we still have another Diablo game coming out for console that's going to come out, in a year or so. Instead, his response was, you all have phones, right? Which kind of, it's not fixing the problem, and it actually hurt even more than not saying anything. So it was bad publicity. Again, it hurt the community. The game hasn't come out yet, so we'll see what happens. But the reason why I bring this up is that Tencent, should not follow this path. And I believe, as I stated earlier, that Tencent has learned that in America, people play consoles when it comes to video games. So, yeah. Okay. So how would I conform if I was to work for Tencent? So I think I want to consider myself a little bit lucky when it comes to this question, because Tencent is kind of already westernized ish. They kind of have two separate divisions, one for domestic, one for abroad. Again, I'm gonna keep going to video games because that's really where they make the revenue, and where I think they've done a lot of things correctly when it comes to global. They would hire a team in the country of origin, and that would deal with basically all the video games, as long as it conforms to the standard of Tencent. It would still be owned by Tencent, but they would hire the right people to code switch. So if I was to be hired by Tencent, I don't believe there'd be a lot that I would have to conform to Tencent. One thing that I do know is that they do hold, the Chinese government does come first, and that still comes across, in their video games and messaging systems outside of China. So that's something I would have to get accustomed to. However, some of the similarities between, I guess, Western companies and Tencent is that they both are very, very keen. It was even Ma's, philosophy that, show results. They want to show results, which is why I think they were able to conform easier and quicker to American values, and I do believe that's why I think it's easy for Americans to kind of, conform to Tencent. So any recommendations that I do have, again, start with video games. I guess learn the market a little bit more, but again, they are doing really well in that in that sector. So keep it up, and again, being able to adapt to consoles. But however, recommendations for the messaging system, like I stated before, I just think you need to get more advertising, and I think the correct advertising to compete, with big names like Facebook and WeChat and Snapchat and Twitter. You really need to market correctly. I do think, tap into those American themes like Thanksgiving, holidays. They have started, I've noticed in movies, they, if you would see QQ and WeChat in the background. Part of it is, because it was funded by WeChat and by Tencent. So I think they're starting, to come into the market that way. I guess my only thing is that they do, code correctly, basically. And I think that's what really will put them a step up against other companies like Facebook and Twitter. Because again, I personally do believe that WeChat, they do have more functionality than the other apps. Especially that they have everything in one app. So we'll see what happens. So is this the last one? Okay. So I kind of wanted to kind of go into why I chose this company. I think it's quite obvious at this point. But so basically, this company is really what got me interested in China. So, and learning Chinese. So when I first really cared about learning about Chinese in China, I was actually at Epcot, and they had this section, this cultural Chinese section, and I really didn't know anything about China. So I go in and they show a video, and I was blown away. So then I come home and do some research, and I find that they have this mobile game called Arena of Valor, or Wang Zhuang Yao. Let me try it out. Let me see how it is. And even though I didn't, I couldn't read anything, it was kind of intuitive. So I started playing that, and just kept falling in love with China. And eventually, I'm like, what? I am going to learn Chinese, and learn more about China. So it really, caught my interest. And I do play Arena of Valor right now, but so it did help me learn Chinese as well, because you could set the language to Chinese, and when I was playing the game and learning Chinese, I would learn all these terms that I probably wouldn't be learning in class, because they were kind of mostly like video game related, and it was kind of cool. So it really helped me learn Chinese that way. I'm still learning, and yeah, it just blew my mind. So that's really why Tencent kind of holds like a special place in my heart. So yeah, I think that's it. Yeah, these are my citations. But I do want to kind of just end off saying that kind of some of the other investments that Tencent is in right now. It's not just video games and messaging. They have a deal with NBA, National Basketball Association, to stream American basketball games in China. They also have, they bought other video game companies like Blizzard, and well, they bought into Blizzard and they outright bought Riot. So they're doing that. They bought a video game called PlayerUnknown Battleground, which was it was in the top 5 at least most popular games in America. And they also have a deal called Chinese Online Comics, based in San Francisco, where they will take Chinese comics and kind of try to disseminate it into an American audience. And they also have a bunch more investments that have really went on. I would be here for another like 20 minutes. They do invest a lot, including in the movie section and other messaging apps. So I think they are a very powerful company, and I do believe that they do have code switching correct for the most part. So I do think that they are doing well, hopefully, and that they will continue on this track. And maybe in the future, instead of using Facebook to communicate, we might actually use WeChat. So we'll see. And that is all that I have for today. I hope you enjoyed this lecture, and I hope you learned a little bit more about Tencent and maybe feel the same way that I do. Okay. 再见。